So you want to buy a BMW Z4M. Well, I don't blame you. Classic cab back proportions, an 8,000 RPM straight six, and a 6-speed manual gearbox makes for an absolutely brilliant sports car. Before you part with a hard-end cash, however, you want to make sure you're getting a good one. Now here at Shooting Brake, we hand-pick brilliant examples of enthusiast cars to save you the trouble, but if you're not lucky enough to buy one from us, here's what you need to know. Now let's take you through the viewing process for a Z4M. The first thing you're going to want to look at is bodywork. Unlike the E46 M3, the Z4M typically doesn't suffer from bodywork issues such as rust, corrosion or lacquer peel. As a result, you should be seeing clean rear arches and clean sills. It's always worth checking regardless. Any issues of corrosion could be a poor respray from previous crash repairs. As such, any bodywork issues should be seen through a critical eye. The exciting nature of the Z4 chassis means some over-enthusiastic owners did bin them off quite early in their life. The Z4M's high market value means only a significant crash would lead to a categorised write-off, so it's important to check even HPI clear examples for previous crash damage. BMW dealer history is not essential or even that desirable these days. Independent specialists who understand the S54 engine are the gold standard for these cars. If there's no service history for the first few years in the car's life, you should be able to get the history from BMW GB's customer service team, so don't be alarmed. Recent replacements of rod bearings, water pump, lower control arms and diff pushers are also a plus. However, I wouldn't look past a Z4M that hasn't had these done, just budget for them as part of your purchase. You want to see all services with 10 weight 60 all on the S54 every 15,000 miles or less. Inspection 1 services are due every 30,000 miles and crucially Inspection 2 services are due every 60,000 miles. Inspection 2 services are critical. Missed services can result in scored cams and other valve train issues, but we'll cover that in more detail later. Moving on to mechanicals, let's start from the back. Big bonus of buying a Z4M is they don't suffer from the cracked boot floor issues like the E46 M3, but you still need to look out for leaking diffs and split CV boots. Both these are minor issues, they shouldn't put you off, but you should budget for their repair if the car you're looking at does have them. Look out for cracked backbox flanges, a minor but common issue. Personally, I think these S54 engines sound even better with cracked flanges, but it's always worth noting regardless. All these issues are fairly cheap to replace, but if you leave the LSD or the drive shafts leaking for too long, you might have to replace them and that can get quite costly. Coming to the middle of the car, you want to check that the gearbox shifts nice and smoothly. The Z4M has a lovely linkage as standard, one of the best ones that BMW ever did. If the gear lever doesn't return to neutral from all sides of the gate, then it could mean you've got broken or sticky detent springs, which can be a gearbox out job to replace. A notchy gear lever can mean worn rubber bushings and linkage, which is a very cheap job to fix, so don't let that put you off buying one. Then finally, we reach the front. Now, before you start the engine, make sure the engine management light comes on with the ignition on and then turns off when you start the engine. Beyond that, you want to ask the seller to make sure the engine's cold when you view it so you can hear what it really does sound like on a cold start. Healthy S54s sound like a bag of spanners when cold, so don't be alarmed. However, you want to listen out for particular knocks or ticks that are much louder than the rest of the engine. A top end tick from the front of the engine can be a snapped Vanos tab, middle can be scored cams from missed inspection 2s, which is fairly rare, and a bearing noise can be a failing water pump or pulley, which is quite cheap to replace. A deeper engine knock can be rod bearings, which is very serious. However, it's worth noting the S54, whilst it's not cheap to maintain properly, it is a genuinely strong and reliable unit when cared for. Good warm-up procedures can mean the original bearings can last the life of the car. Unfortunately, there's no reliable way to really know the conditions of your rod bearings, which is why we always recommend having them changed above 80,000 miles or buying a car that's recently had them done. Look out for hunting idles and poor throttle response, which can signify MAF or TPS issues. Cars such as these with CSL style airboxes may also have an alpha N map which deletes the MAF. That's not the case on this car, but if it is the case, you want to make sure that the car immediately settles into a smooth idle when you start it. If it hunts straight away, it's because the ECU hasn't been mapped properly to run without the MAF, which strangely will also mean the ECU will cut throttle applications whilst braking, meaning no heel and towing. It will also cut a bit of power and you'll get worse MPG, so do make sure that that map has been put in properly. Finally, we've got brakes. Excessive brake dust on singular wheels can mean sticky calipers, which is quite a common issue on these cars. Brakes are surprisingly expensive and fairly weak on these cars, so do factor in worn discs and pads into the purchase price. If all checks out, it's time to test drive the car. I would always get the seller to drive the car first, that way you get an idea of how they treat the car and their attitudes towards warming up engines. Once you get behind the wheel, it's key to see a nice smooth pull from 1500 RPM to 4000 RPM plus. Jerkiness or hesitance at low revs could mean a MAF or head gasket issue. Pay particular attention to any drivetrain slop, particularly when changing gear or applying throttle. A knock when engaging first may mean a replacement diff push is needed, whilst general slop could be gearbox and prop shaft mounts, all fairly inexpensive to place and common failure points. The Z4M's transmission tunnel was too small to use the Getrag 420G box used in the E46 M3. As a result, BMW gave it a ZF unit which is much slicker to shift but also more fragile. Entire gearbox failures are rare, but look out for crunching synchros on fast shifts. A gaunchy diff can often be the result of an LSD having not locked up enough in its life, a common symptom on garage queens. A few figures of eights normally sorts this out, or worst comes to worst, you may need a diff service. The Z4M cabin should be fairly refined at speed. Excessive wind noise may be due to a poor ceiling pillar's window, which can be adjusted with the door cards off. Those are my key checkpoints for inspecting a Z4M, but a proper buyer's guide would be incomplete without discussing key modifications. So first things first, we've got KW V3 coilovers. Now, damping and suspension on the standard Z4M is probably its biggest weak point, and it makes the chassis quite spiky. On coilovers, these cars are much more compliant and much more friendly at the limit, and to be frank, it makes it a much better sports car for the road and for track. On top of that, the S54 has individual throttle bodies, meaning when you put a carbon airbox on them, they sound absolutely incredible, as I'm sure you already know. This example has the Evolve carbon airbox, which means that it retains a standard MAF. It doesn't need an Alpha N remap. You get all the noise without any issues with mapping, drivability, MPG, anything like that. It sounds absolutely incredible. It looks absolutely incredible. It's a super side modification and there's basically no downside. This example's also got M3 low control arms and braided brake lines which sharpen up the steering and brake feel. So where does that leave us in 2024 with the BMW Z4M? I think these are such an interesting purchase at the moment in the UK market. Prices track similarly to E46 M3s, but you get a way more sports car for your money. For one thing, there's no rear subframe issues and there's no bodywork issues, which makes them much easier to buy. On top of that, they're lighter, they're faster, they've got better brake standard, and they've got better seats. Get more performance for your money. It's a much more special feeling sitting in a bespoke sports car as opposed to a coupe. And on top of that, they're much, much rarer.
If you're after brilliant examples of performance cars like this BMW Z4M, you can find them on shootingbrake.com. Shooting Brake is an online auction platform run by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. We're your home for buying, selling and discussing the cars that you love, and we've got plenty more content lined up, so make sure you stay subscribed to our channel. Thanks for watching and catch you next time.